So what is executive function? So many of you have maybe heard this term or read this term, or even your own child might struggle with executive function. But what I can say is there's no single definition or model of executive function that us experts agree upon. So commonly though, you hear it as organization, and it is. It is one part of executive function, organization. It's not necessarily the entire picture, but that's an area that gets a lot of attention because it's a very obvious area. We see it in our kids right up front. We see how it affects them, but there's other areas of executive function that also affect these children. So how would I define executive function? There's many different definitions out there, but this is a working definition that I have for now. Executive function is an umbrella term for the higher level mental processes in our brains that are responsible for goal-directed behavior. And when I say goal-directed behavior, I'm not talking about trying to achieve a goal of losing weight, okay? It's not that type of goal. Goal means it's not an automatic behavior. It's something you have to take multiple steps to do and multiple processes underlying it to get to that target. So they call it goal-directed, but I like to think of a target behavior, like cleaning your room, or the target behavior is to get to school on time, those types of things. All the different processes we have to do to execute that. And our executive function skills, we engage them even more when we have new or challenging situations. So when you're put into a situation, you don't already have a set model in your head, that's when you engage your executive function skills, which are problem-solving skills, even more. You rely on them even more to figure out how to approach that new situation. So the prefrontal cortex, which is that big, wonderful 2 lobes in the front part of our skulls, develops at the same time as the development of executive function skills. We've been able to show in science that executive function skills, all those different skills I talked about, working memory, cognitive flexibility, planning, prioritizing, all of those skills are associated with that frontal lobe development. Prefrontal cortex is the last part of the brain to develop in us humans, also evolutionary speaking, but also as you develop as an adult. It's the last part of your brain to make all the neural connections for that area. And it's not fully matured until ages 25 to 30. So these are metaphors trying to say that we have this little conductor or CEO in the frontal part of our brains that is telling every other part of our brain what to do. It's telling it, go do this, go do that, and it's directing all these other parts of our brain. Actually, though, what we're finding from neuroscience is it's a little bit more complicated than that. We don't have one CEO sitting in our frontal lobes that's telling everything else what to do. We have multiple CEOs, multiple co-conductors. So there's multiple executive function skills. Remember, executive function is just an umbrella term for multiple skills and processes are coming under that. So what skills are involved in executive function? So the higher level skills, memory, working memory, long-term memory, retrieving things, cognitive flexibility, prioritizing, organization, planning, and self-monitoring. So memory has to do with, if you think of working memory at least, you have to hold on to the information and manipulate that information in your mind at the same time. You're kind of doing multiple things. You're holding on to the information and then you're working with that information. That's why it's called working memory. You're working with that information. Then also retrieval of learned information. So retrieving that information from your long-term memory. Students with executive function will really struggle with that. They'll get to a test and they'll have studied and done a great job trying to study, but they get to the test and then it's gone. They can't retrieve it from their long-term memory. So that also has to do with how we organize our information getting in and how we would retrieve it. The next one is cognitive flexibility, which is a very important one. It's how we mentally shift or are flexible in our approach to things, in our perspectives, our mindsets, and in our behavior. How well we can shift from one thing to the next. How well we can shift in the morning to get up and go to school or stop eating and actually go get ready, right? You're shifting, you're being flexible and stopping, using your inhibition, and moving to the next thing. Prioritizing. Determining what to do first. So this is something many of us have every day we have to deal with, is we have to prioritize things, right? There's so many important things, but we have to prioritize. And what to do first based on the level of importance and being able to inhibit our impulses or distractions to then actually do it. And then also something that comes under prioritizing is recognizing the main points versus the non-important points. Now that can do with a student listening to a lecture, listening to the teacher talk. If you ask them what the main point was of what that teacher was trying to say, they'll say, well, there were many different things and there was this and that, but they won't actually be able to tell you the one main point. They can't pin or point that one main point. They struggle with being able to filter that and select the main point out of there. In reading, the child might be reading and they read a whole page and you say, okay, so what was the main point? Reading comprehension, what was the main point from that? Again, they struggle with being able to express the main point or identify it. But that can be trained. It's not something that you cannot train. You can train that. The next is organization. So this is the one we're more familiar with. Organization of our physical space, right? The students that have the papers everywhere, or you can't find anything in their desk or their drawers or their bedroom, oh my gosh, that's organizing physical space. Time management, how you organize your time. And then also how you organize newly learned information coming in. So that's something that I really focus on with students. When they are having so much information coming at them, how do they actually categorize it? How are they actually able to see the big picture, the main point, and then put those details under that main point, under that category? Students struggle with that. And also how they organize their approach to problem solving. What are the thinking processes that go on in how they approach to problem solve something? In everyday life, at school, oh, I missed getting in my assignment. Well, how do you problem solve that? Do you go talk to the teacher? Do you totally forget it happened? Do you wait till your parent yells at you to tell you to go figure it out, right? How do you go about problem solving that? Do you even think to problem solve it, right? Then the next one is planning. So of course, thinking ahead about the future, long-term view, the short-term view, what do I have coming up after this talk or something? What do I have going on tomorrow? And then also breaking things down into steps, sequences. So if you ask a student to tell you, well, how did you go about studying? Tell me the steps you did. I read something, and I went through my cards. They can start thinking through it, but they don't automatically identify, well, I looked at my review sheet, I pinpointed what the main points were, I went back and thought what the teacher wanted me to know, then I went into my notes to review them, then I went and read the chapter and actually did the study questions at the end. All those different things that really strategic learners will do when they have to study for something. Of course, I'm talking developmentally. These would be high school students who are doing all these different things, but these are all skills that eventually you learn how to do and implement. The next one is self-monitoring, which is a really important one that I feel is really key to any kind of learning, and that comes into play across all these skills. The ability to self-reflect and also check yourself accurately, be able to know when you make an error and identify it, and then being able to actually adjust accordingly. So many students who have executive function issues may not even see they made an error. They're not able to really see that, or they don't automatically self-check. And so then it just passes them by. Sometimes they do see the error, but they don't immediately try to change it right away. They actually have to be told, okay, now go and change that. What do you want to do about that error? Not every child struggles with that, but some do. So I don't know if you realize as adults, what you've done is you've built up these schemas or these models of many different things we do in our lives, how we learn, how we drive, how we execute things. You've built up all these schemas. We rely on those. We tap into those to then execute the next thing. We recognize what's similar from one thing to the next, and we use those skills, and then we apply it to the next thing, right? Students who struggle with executive function do not naturally do that, are not able to infer that automatically. Again, it can be trained, there can be interventions to help that, but it's not something that works as easily for them. Their executive function skills are developing during this time, during all these years while they're in school. And so this is why it's so important that not only in the home, but also at school, that we are teaching these skills explicitly and directly to these kids. And that's why Fraser Academy is at the forefront of this. They have recognized the huge opportunity that this gives kids with learning differences. And so that's why they're implementing executive function curriculum for all students at every grade level. And I can tell you, I work with a lot of different schools, and there's no school that's doing it at the level they're trying to do it at. And it's really quite amazing. So now I'm just going to talk briefly, not too long, but just a little bit on students who do struggle with executive function differences. So we know this, who struggles with executive function differences? Typically, most of what's been out there in terms of literature and also in the clinical world are students with attention deficit disorder, right? Or attention deficit ADD or ADHD, hyperactivity, or a combination of those two issues in attention. And so kids, it used to be thought that executive function is only associated with those students who have ADD. But we now know that other populations, other students, also struggle with executive function issues, which to me as a neuroscientist makes sense to me because that frontal lobe, as I said, is interacting with every other part of the brain. So also students with learning differences such as dysgraphia, nonverbal learning disabilities, dyslexia, dyscalculia, kids with autism, students who also struggle with anxiety and depression, and this is true for adults as well. If a person is struggling with anxiety or depression, it depresses our ability to be able to access those frontal lobe functions. So what about IQ and executive function? What's the relationship between that? Well, your IQ is not really related to your executive function skills. There is some relationship, but it's a minimal relationship. Basically, if you have an IQ that's very high, it does not mean that you'll have very high executive functioning skills, is what that's saying. You can actually have a quite high reasoning ability in terms of IQ, but you can also have challenges or weaknesses in executive function. So these are kids that have the intelligence, but they do not know how to use their abilities and how to be those effective learners. And if you look at what predicts how well children will do later in school, more evidence is showing that the executive function skills, such as working memory or inhibition, actually predict their success later in school better than their IQ. So it's not that if you have a high IQ, you're automatically going to have high executive functioning skills. Some kids do, but there are also students who do not have that, who have a disparate between those two things. And so what are some of the signs that we know, and I'm sure you as parents see in some of your students perhaps, that they're struggling with executive function issues? Of course, missing assignments over time can be an indicator. They studied for the quiz but forgot everything. Their grades don't necessarily match their capabilities or their high IQ. Their parents or them might report as taking them 2 to 3 times the amount to do their homework. They might go stuck or get blank at times. They can't think of the next step. They might struggle with initiating that first step. They're inflexible in their approach to things. They are very literal thinkers. When I work with students with executive function differences, they do not get certain jokes because they are so literal in their understanding of language. They're very concrete in their thinking. More specifically, this is where I specialize in, is how does it affect their learning in material? So in writing, they might show signs of having a hard time initiating the actual writing process, being able to generate ideas for their thesis or the prompt, and also organizing their ideas. So particularly in essays that require a lot of structure and a lot of evidence and a lot of detail, like analytical essays, they might struggle with that. In reading comprehension, students who do not retain what they have read, so that working memory piece or that long-term memory piece as well, when they read something, they can't necessarily always be able to tell you what they just read and remember it. They don't take maybe an organized approach to reading a textbook. They don't see the strategic big picture. That with a textbook, you might need to be more detail-oriented in every word reading it, because there's a lot more information in a textbook than maybe a fictional book, where you don't have to be so perfect about every word and making sure you understood every single word on that page to get the big picture. And also summarizing 1 to 2 main points per paragraph. They don't tend to be able to pick out those main points or filter out those main points from the details. Also in math, not showing their work. This is a typical one I have a lot of students struggle with. Not remembering the steps to take in that math question, and not maybe checking or self-monitoring their answers, either accurately or they don't do it at all. So now I want to get to the next level of how do we foster executive function development? How do parents, the school is one level, but also the home is another level of how do you foster these skills in students with executive function? And this is more of an overview, these general principles. So how many of you have heard of the term metacognition? A few of you? So metacognition is a term from the psychology literature that has to do with thinking about your thinking. Right? Reflecting, self-reflecting on your own abilities, self-reflecting on your own processes. And what I try to impart to parents is you want to foster that in your child, to be able to think about their own thinking and helping them understand their own learning differences and their own strategies that do work for them. And also being able to help them build their own executive function strategy toolbox. Their virtual executive function toolbox, modeling problem solving through self-talk. So try to model out loud some of the things that you do in the steps you take to prioritize for the day. While you're in the car with them, oh, I have to go pick up your sister, and then we gotta go to this practice, and then we gotta go do that. But you know, I'm actually realizing I can't do that because I only have this much time, so I'm gonna prioritize to focus on this thing so that we can get there. You know, like just talking through what you naturally already are doing. You automatically are doing these processes in your head. Make them explicit to your child. Also provide the external support for your child's developing executive function skills, but then gradually withdraw the support. Don't be your child's frontal lobe. Foster autonomy in your child. Encourage them to try to solve problems or situations on his or her own first, but with your support there. Because then I have parents on the other side where they say, well, my child just won't do what I'm asking them to do. I go leave, I tell them what to do, and it's not done when I come back. So they're expecting the child to be able to just do it. And it's good to ask them to problem solve and to try to think of the steps and processes while you're there supporting next to them to kind of, you know, interject, hey, this might be better to try it this way, but let's see how it goes the way you're trying it, you know, versus just expecting them to do it without any support. So it's a balance. It's a balance. Something that's really important, especially with kids with executive function issues, you want to praise their effort. These kids put in 150%, if not 200% effort. When I have parents and teachers, sometimes they say, I think my kid's lazy, and sometimes kids are. I'm not going to deny that. But I can tell you with a lot of kids I work with executive function that have these profiles, they want to try. They want to do well. They want to be able to succeed. They just don't know how. Things to keep in mind. Think about your own strengths and challenges around executive function. So also teachers, I ask them to do this too. Think for yourself, where are your strengths? Where are the challenges for you around those 6 areas of executive function? Being aware of that will let you better support these skills developing in your child. If you know where you're good at certain things and where you might have challenges, and then helping your child where you know their strengths and weaknesses are, that really helps you be a parent that can scaffold appropriately. Try to be mindful to not be your child's frontal lobe at all times, right? You're gonna be the frontal lobe, that's your job as a parent. I'm not saying take that away from you, but what I am saying, try to be aware of the moments where you can pull back and help support them and give them questions to think about their thinking. And I'm just gonna come to this one last slide, and then I'll be done. This is a study that was done, a very impressive study that was a 30-year study done where they followed kids with learning differences from childhood into adulthood, so the same people. And they tracked different things. And they tried to figure out what were the attributes that made students with learning differences successful in adulthood. And what they found is that these were the key things, and some of these are executive function skills, that helped students become successful. So self-awareness, that self-reflection piece, that metacognition piece, being aware of your own learning strengths and weaknesses or challenges, being proactive, being able to self-advocate, persevering, and goal setting, being able to actually verbalize or concretely think about your goals and the steps you need to get to that goal and the actual action steps you need, having effective support systems, and having effective emotional coping strategies. And also, if you want to access that report, it has all these strategies for parents to do to help support those things, and you can go online and actually access it for free, that report. And it's really, I recommend it to a lot of different parents. So I just wanted to close down by saying thank you to Fraser Academy, especially Maureen, for having me here. It has been a true pleasure coming and working with the group at Fraser Academy. They are such a sophisticated level of educators that I've come in contact with, and I really feel privileged to be able to help guide them on this journey. I'd also like to thank Jo Stebbing, the head of Tutoring Learning Services. She has been key in bringing me into Fraser Academy, and we have worked very closely together on many of the things that Fraser Academy is going to be doing this next year. And also Suzanne, I just got to work with her a little bit today, and she's helped immensely in terms of helping teachers at Fraser Academy understand executive function and what needs to happen in the curriculum. And of course, the executive function team that Maureen talked about, many different teachers participated back in June, came in during the summer. We went through training together and still kept helping and working over the summer, and they did a fantastic job. And they're going to continue to work with all the other teachers throughout these next few years. And also to all the dedicated teachers and learning specialists at Fraser Academy, which many of them are back against that wall. And they're so supportive and sweet to come to the talk tonight after they've already been at work all day too. So I just want to thank everyone, and thank you to the parents for coming tonight and learning more about executive functioning. So thank you.